everyone, and welcome to One Civil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. As always, I hope you'll enjoy this live commentary, and today will be the day I earn your subscription. For today's story, we are responding to a story from The Atlantic from 3 days ago, about mask mandates. Mask mandates apparently are illogical. That's the premise of the article. Mask mandates are illogical. Premise, but it's okay. Okay. So, all right. So here's what I think, just generally speaking. I think that trying to follow logic and reason is good. And it's not necessarily always possible to always follow it 100% consistently because life is complicated, as we've discussed on this channel many, many times. But, it's nice to have some broad line principles and them to make sense. This is good, particularly when you're mandating people do things. It is good that those things at least make sense. Then we can go from there and then ask questions like, okay, is it enough that they make sense? Right? That would be another question we could ask, right? I'm not saying it's a necessary condition, or I'm not saying it's sufficient. I'm saying it's necessary. Right? Making sense is necessary, not sufficient. So it makes sense for people to be forced to wear masks is a good first step in a logic chain, right? That makes sense. Then we can go on to, okay, even though it makes sense, are there countervailing considerations like freedom, or how much does it make sense? Or what are the drawbacks, if any? What are the benefits, if any? What are the relative merits of it, if any, right? We can weigh things in terms of many different domains, health and freedom and safety and liberty and all kinds of domains. And we could have at least an intelligent conversation about the relative trade-offs or merits of it. But you know what helps a lot with that entire conversation? If the wearing of the masks as a fundamental premise makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then what are we wearing? What are we trading it off against? I'm not sure. But The Atlantic seems to be of the opinion that even assuming as a baseline premise, the mask mandates are illogical, that's totally cool. Okay, I mean that's an opinion. That's an opinion to be sure. Let's read this opinion from The Atlantic. Title: Mask mandates are illogical. So what? They only need to align with the community's goals. I told you I wasn't making this up, guys. When I said the premise was the mask mandates are illogical, I wasn't straw manning the article. When I said, hey, they're going to say that mask mandates are illogical. That wasn't a straw man. That was just me reading the title. That's what the title of the article says. Premise: mask mandates are illogical. Conclusion: so what? Okay. Fine. Let's read some more from this article from February 20th, a mere 3 days ago. When the mayor of Washington, D.C. announced changes to the city's mask mandate last week, spit hit the fan. As of March the 1st, district residents will need to cover up in order to attend school, go to a library, or ride in a taxi. But gyms, sports arenas, concert venues, and houses of worship, all the places where people like to breathe hard or sing and shout in close proximity, will be facial free-for-alls. If the goal of mask policies is to reduce transmission of the coronavirus as much as possible, then the new rules are difficult to reason out. Right. I mean, again, we could get into does it make sense? We could ask this from a whole bunch of questions, right? One of which would be the efficacy of the mask. That would be part of the analysis of does it make sense? Do masks work? Does it depend on what kind of mask? Does it depend on how they're worn? Does it depend on what people do with the masks when they're not wearing them, such as putting them in their pocket or not, or whatever, right? Are masks effective? If so, how much? By what? What are the trade-offs? What are the benefits? We could have this discussion, and there is discussion to be had. But it would help a lot if the fundamental premise of the masks, what I thought the fundamental point of the masks was to reduce the transmission of coronavirus. Whether or not the masks are successful for that goal, I thought that was the goal. So yes, if you're trying to measure DC's policies against the goal, of let's reduce transmission, these policies do seem hard. Why in a taxi, but not in a concert venue? Okay. That's a good question. Why should children who are generally at low risk of severe disease and nice for the Atlantic to acknowledge that, have to mask while sitting quietly in class when their more vulnerable elders can sing unmasked in church? It seems arbitrary, inconsistent, and absurd. Yes, or as we put it in law, arbitrary and capricious is what the phraseology we usually use in law. Arbitrary and capricious. As I've said, or as we've talked about many times, there's many different tiers of review for government action, right? We talk about strict scrutiny, we talk about intermediate scrutiny, and at the bottom of the pyramid is rational basis. The government needs a rational reason through some legitimate means. Any legitimate means of government and any rational reason, any legitimate means and any legitimate end that is rational. That's rational basis. It's pretty low. Any legitimate means and any legitimate ends is rational basis. That's the bare minimum for government action. The bare minimum for government action is a rational basis, which they normally don't have trouble meeting. Going below rational basis means we're into the wonderful territory of arbitrary and capricious. Government can't do that. It denies equal protection of the law, among other problems, because it's arbitrary and capricious. Can't do that if you're the government. Then again, so does just about every community mask mandate. Yeah, that's kind of the problem from the people who have been criticizing mask mandates, among many others, is that among many criticisms people who are critical of the mask mandates have, on top of their relative efficacy, is that the rules don't make any sense. So they're arbitrary, which makes them a bit of a problem from a governmental action standpoint. If the rules don't apply equally in different settings, they're unfair. If they do, they're ridiculous. Good luck complying in a restaurant, bar, or airport food court. Pointing out the logical flaws in mask mandates is easy. Yeah. Fixing them is hard and important. Well, maybe fixing them is important. I'll assume your premise for the moment. Not that I necessarily agree with it, but let's assume it's important for the sake of this, but it's hard. Okay, it's hard for the government. All right, I don't care. Right? Even under rational basis review, right? Spreading disease is bad. Let's just assume all the best possible cases for the mask. Let's just make the best possible theoretical case for the mask. Not necessarily saying any of it's true, but let's just make the government's life just super easy on this. Let's just make their life really, really easy to make the analysis work, okay? The mask will, in fact, prevent transmission. To some degree, that makes it worthwhile, okay? I know that's a lot of concession right off the top. I'm conceding a lot of ground, but we're going to go there, right? We're just going to assume the masks are useful and effective to some degree that it makes sense. Fine. Does it mean it makes sense in all places, at all times, in all environments? Of course not. That would be dumb. To say that it's effective in some places and sometimes doesn't necessarily mean all places and all times. So as we are developing our rules, we will want to account for this so that the rules flow from the reason. Right? Premise is masks prevent transmission. Premise is the masks are effective. Come up with rules that make sense. Given that underlying premise of you're trying to prevent disease and transmission of disease, why do these rules make sense the way that you've crafted them? And if you can't do that, if you can't get to there, if you can't meet the bare minimum of rational basis, which means reasoned, you have a legal problem. Putting aside all parts of higher levels of review, just to meet the bare minimum of governmental action, we have problems. Cases may be trending down in nearly every part of the United States, but the surge will almost certainly not be our last, just as Omicron will almost certainly not be the last variant to infect the world. When infection rates begin to rise again, local and state governments can try to implement mask policies that actually make sense to people being ordered around. That would be extremely helpful. Just in like a way of getting compliance. I mean, if the policies make sense, that would be a great place to start. Take my city, Baltimore, as an example. Everyone older than 2 must wear a mask indoors at any location other than a private home, including at food service establishments. Yet indoor dining, which has been associated with increased COVID-19 transmission rates, has been allowed for more than a year, and diners don't need to be vaccinated. Performers are allowed to sing, speak, and play the oboe sans mask, despite the fact that maskless music has been known to be a potent source of contagion since the early days of the pandemic. I frequently walk past restaurants with masks required for entry signs taped to the front door and their windows fogged up from the breath of maskless patrons, right? Because the virus stops spreading once you're sitting down. We've been noting this problem for quite a long time. It doesn't quite make sense. But if you want to close all the food establishments for all indoor dining, that comes with its own problems too. And it's like, well, you want to put on the mask in between bites. Yeah. And in spaces where masks are both required and feasible, say pharmacies and grocery stores, hardly anyone is enforcing their use. Even in Baltimore, they've grown tired of the bullshit, which says a lot when it's Baltimore. It all feels rather performative and silly. My God, you're so close to a realization. It's frightening. You're so close. You're so close to realization. You're almost there. It almost feels performative and silly. Just get to the next step, man. Just get to the next step. It is performative and silly. It is performative and silly. Why have a mandate if it can be so easily ignored? Quote, the public sees right through that, and I think that's led to a lot of backlash. Joseph Allen, director of Harvard's Healthy Building Program, told me. To Allen, mask mandate contradictions and compliance failures are signs the United States should stop trying so hard to influence human behavior. Yeah. And start in focusing on improved ventilation and filtration in buildings. Okay, that seems like a plausible thing to do. Masking, because it's so obviously visible and has become unavoidably politicized, is the pandemic mitigation strategy that's easiest for most people to notice, which might be why it's received so much attention from the public and media. But not necessarily the most effective, by the way. They're not arguing that even in this sentence. They're arguing it's the easiest for people to notice, which goes to the performative aspect of it, right? As opposed to its effectiveness. But structural improvements can operate in the background, protecting people without making them feel inconvenienced. Perhaps even more so. I don't know. I don't know if it's more so, but it's probably arguable. One common, though not definitely proven argument against mask mandates is they don't actually change people's behavior. People who would have masked up anyway cover up, and people who don't want to mask wear theirs badly or ignore the rules. Quote, anyone who's been in any sort of public location at any time during the pandemic recognizes that mask mandates are not followed consistently. So maybe they're not that great from a matter of public health policy, even with the premise that the masks are effective, which again is a premise we're giving them for the moment of this argument. But, debatable at best. At best. But even assuming that, right, there are still these problems because people aren't using them and they're not being effective. So the mandates themselves are completely ineffective towards whatever goal you're trying to get from them. Unless, of course, the goal is just to get people into a state of compliance for the sake of it, in which case maybe it's very effective for that goal. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was to try to reduce the transmission of the virus, remember? But even disregarded mandates could affect people in other helpful ways. Disregarded mandates can affect people in other ways. Do tell. Quote, from my perspective, the main benefit is not so much the masking itself, but the message to society the wave is not over. Well, I mean, if the messaging is important to you, I could wear a button. I could wear a button that just says COVID or Omicron. I mean, if the messaging is important, can I wear a button? A mask mandate may not magically swaddle the faces of everyone in its jurisdiction, no shit, but it could remind already enthusiastic maskers to avoid large gatherings or lead non-maskers to give the people around them a little bit more space. I don't know that the people who are wearing the masks need the reminder to avoid the large gatherings, but okay. Mask mandates are easier to enforce in highly controlled environments such as schools. A particular state or city's values and political makeup matter for compliance too. I'd like to take note once again, the author of this article appears to be writing from Baltimore, which is pretty blue. And even in Baltimore, where we have to give people space to destroy, to quote the Baltimore mayor, even in Baltimore, we have to give people space to destroy, the people of Baltimore are not putting up with this bullshit. They are not wearing the masks. So I'm not sure that politics is necessarily the main factor here. Even in Baltimore, you can't get people to comply with this crap anymore. Assuming you ever could in the first place, incidentally. Quote, if it's a community in which most people are already going to mask, and you just need to convince a few more, in that case, a mandate might actually be helpful. What is wrong with that sentence? Spot the problem in that sentence. I'll read it again so we can play along at home. If it's a community in which most people are already going to mask and you just need to convince a few more, in that case, a mandate might actually be beneficial. Spot the problem. Spot the problem. Is a mandate a tool of persuasion? Is a mandate a way to convince? Or is mandate a way to control? There seems to be a somewhat big difference between mandating and convincing. In convincing someone to do someone, they want to do it for themselves. And also, incidentally, they might then be in a position to convince others because you've convinced them. And they have friends, presumably, too, that they will talk to, and maybe they will convince those friends, and so forth and so on. If your argument is persuasive, right, you will convince them. If you simply say mandate, I don't know that you're convincing. Is there anyone out there? There might be someone out there who is so deep under the boot this might actually apply to, which makes me scary that this might be true. But I'm going to ask the question anyway. Is there anyone out there who said to themselves, I don't believe in masks, and then the government said, we're mandating it, and you say, you know what? I believe in it now. I'm convinced those are good things. The answer is probably yes. The fact it's yes is depressing me. Let's move on. Such communities are widespread. About 2/3 of Americans have constantly supported the idea of a state or local mask mandate since August, when a bi-monthly Axios Ipsos poll first started asking the question. The other 30% of American public likely includes people who have lost faith in the mask mandate that don't seem to make sense. Yeah. The way for decision makers to earn back their trust, Kirk Sell told me, is by listening to each community, taking their needs seriously and tailoring policies to fit them. That would be like one of the things governments might do, guys. Did you just hear that? You know how governments can be more effective? Did you hear that? What if, here's an idea. What if different communities listened to the people that make up those communities, right? And tried to make policies based on, what the peoples in those communities might want. Like we might do in some kind of representative democracy where the government is responsive to the population's wishes, desires, and preferences. Yeah. A town whose top priorities are keeping schools open and local businesses afloat could mask mandates and testing in schools, but allow adults to go mask-free in bars, which students can avoid. I'm not sure that really makes logical sense, though, from the position of the mask, though, because, I mean, the kids might be in school, but yeah. A town that wants to avoid straining its hospitals might flatten the curve. 2 weeks to flatten the curve, everyone. How has your 2 weeks to flatten the curve been going? Has it been going well? I can't wait for this 14-day period to be over, man. When does it end? A town that wants to avoid straining its hospitals might flatten the curve by enforcing mask requirements in high capacity settings such as concert halls and sports arenas. If rules are going to be applied unevenly, with mask mandates in some locations, which not others, which might make sense, incidentally, because they should be somewhat related to the underlying rationale, the tightest restrictions should apply in buildings such as grocery stores, workplaces, post offices, and schools, says Ann Sonson, a public health expert at Dartmouth. These are not necessarily the places where the virus is most likely to spread, but elderly and immunocompromised people might not be able to avoid them as easily as they could as a bar or hockey game. I mean, you kind of can in a lot of places, particularly with delivery services. Yeah. I think people have this expectation that everything has to be perfect as far as how logic works together. Perfect? No. Rational? Yes. But no mandate is ever going to be perfectly consistent, and that's okay. Mask mandates can still make sense as long as they serve community shared goals. By Rachel Gutman, Senior Associate Editor at The Atlantic. Well, my friends, that brings us to the end of the article of Stupid Letter Time from The Atlantic. Mask mandates are illogical, so what? They only need to align with community goals. In this episode of Uncivil Law, we learned that the people who are putting in place the mask mandates know, or at least are well aware of this point, that their own mandates are illogical and ineffective. Even in places like Baltimore, which is pretty blue, they're ineffective because people are not doing it, if they ever were. Which might go a long way to the idea of whether or not it makes sense to have mask mandates at all. Even again, assuming the masks work when used, which is not necessarily true, or necessarily clear at least, let me say that, not necessarily clear at least, when it comes to all variants of COVID for all kinds of masks. But it's okay that the mask mandates are illogical. It's okay that one community could ban them at concerts and not another. Which I guess in one sense makes sense because it's more democratic. So that's nice. But the virus probably doesn't vote. And so it probably doesn't care that much about what communities want. So if the purpose of the mask is to prevent transmission, then one would, or I mean, that was the point, right? I mean, what else could it do? If the point of the mask is to prevent transmission, then one would think that the policy should be made in accordance with that. But people aren't doing it anyway, so the whole exercise is futile, except as a virtue signal, which is its only value, which the article kind of acknowledges by saying it's almost like it's performative. It is almost like that. It's a lot almost like that, indeed. So, yeah. So I just thought this is interesting because I think goes to show, I think this editorial is more representative of what a lot of people think than not. I think that there's a fair amount of people. I mean, you can see this, I think, just in reality. You can see this in any number of people who don't wear masks, even though they mandate them for others. On my community tab yesterday, it was a good little video. I recommend watching it. On my community tab yesterday, I posted a video of a woman trying to be shouted down at a school board meeting, and the school board threatening to have her arrested for voicing her views, because the woman went up to the school board meeting and said, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, and you can watch the original, but said, like, you are asking for mask mandates. You are saying they're really important and stuff. And also, you shamed me, the person speaking personally, you shamed me for not wearing a mask. Well, here is your social media. Here is your Facebook. Here is you around your family and children. Not wearing masks. And they tried to shut them down and say, well, you're not talking about our children and the schools, so you're out of order. Where's Norman Rockwell with freedom of speech on that one, right? And of course, this school board person is not the only one. You can see it in any number of politicians. With the mask on, mask off. My personal favorite of all time might be the one where I think it was Joe Biden maybe it was, it was one of Joe Biden's press secretaries, I think. Maybe it wasn't a press secretary for the White House. Maybe it was one of the departments. I forget the exact details. But you literally see, because the camera, right? You see the camera is looking into the wings of the stage, right? So the camera's looking straight on at the podium where there's like curtains around, as there typically is like at a podium, right? But one of the cameras isn't looking at the podium. One of the cameras is looking in the wing of the stage. And you literally see this guy come in, whoever he is from the Biden administration, White House or otherwise. You literally see this guy come in without a mask on, okay? You see him stand in the wing of the stage, take the mask out, put it on, walk in the stage, get to the podium, and take the mask off. Or there was the time, for example, that I'm pretty sure it was AOC, who was in a photograph with a bunch of people. And there's video of the photograph being taken. And in the photograph, she's wearing a mask. But she just put it on right before the photograph and took it right off again. And then afterwards is talking to everyone without a mask. Or I think it was Stacey Abrams, who was in front of who was sitting at a school where all the school children were wearing masks, but not Stacey Abrams. Or the mayor of Chicago, who said it was really important for her to get her hair done. Or Nancy Pelosi, who wasn't wearing a mask when getting her hair done. Or the governor of wherever, I forget at this point, who took off their mask and when confronted about it, said it was because the Spirit moved them. Right? You can see from their own behaviors, they don't really believe in the mask mandates. They don't believe it in their day-to-day lives. The whole thing has been performative. If not the entire time, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to speak to the various early days of COVID. Maybe it wasn't performative in the various early days of COVID, but it's been performative for a very, very long time at this point. And the communities are now going to be doing it because, as this article basically acknowledges, we're doing it for the performance. We're doing it specifically because the masks are readily visible. That was part of the article too. They can be seen. And they allow people to judge us as morally right and those who don't as morally wrong. Even though other methods such as, filtration in the buildings might be more effective. Which sounds logical to me. I would think, all things being equal. But it's not important that the masks and their mandates be logical. According to this article, it is not important that they be logical. is rather that merely that they be performed. So we know who the righteous and the unrighteous are, and who the heathens and non-heathens are. And this article, I think, represents something that a lot of people have been thinking for a really long time. And it's kind of nice in some ways for someone to just come out and just flat out say it. I just want the masks as a palliative. It's not even a palliative. I want it as a, what's worse than a palliative? I want it as a, homeopathy. There we go. That's even worse than a palliative. I want it as a homeopathy. I want to do the ritual thing and shake the thing 10 times, and then 10 times more, and 10 times more, and 10 times more, and wear the mask and use the crystals because it simply makes me feel better. Which, as far as I'm concerned, if you want to wear the mask, go crazy. I don't care. Just stay the hell away from me. Although I might ridicule when you're wearing the mask because you're dumb. But, you're allowed to be dumb. And I'm allowed to make fun of you for being dumb. That's also okay. But in any case, that brings us to the end of this article from The Atlantic, where I think we learn a truth that we all kind of secretly knew, that our betters who are mandating the masks maybe don't really believe in it after all, and now they just want to do it purely out of performance art. Please remember, if you've liked this YouTube video, to do all the YouTube things. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. If you see stupid articles or other things that you'd like to see me respond to, please remember to leave a comment in the YouTube comments with other things you might want me to respond to. They might generate other live streams from me. And remember to hit the like button. For 99 cents a month, you too can become an uncivilian and support the channel. I hope all's been well. I'm going to go get my workout on in now. Until later, my friends, I hope all is well. Cheers and goodbye.